I'm originally from Australia, from Sydney, Australia, and I have been coming back and forth between Sydney and Japan for about 20 years now. And I probably have about, since 2005, I've been pretty immersed in innovation and startup ecosystems. Initially as an entrepreneur, bringing an Australian startup into Japan back in 2005. And since then, I've been lucky to be involved in university-based innovation centers and government initiatives. And now, as Brian mentioned, I'm here back in Osaka running Rainmaking Innovation Japan. And so the company has an overall mission to solve big problems, and they might be problems of individuals or companies or society more broadly, by unleashing the power of entrepreneurship. And we basically do that by partnering with big corporations, so big Japanese corporations, and we help them to identify and prioritize innovation opportunities. And then together we design programs or projects to create tangible business impact. And we much prefer to work where innovation meets sustainability or SDG goals more generally. So that's a bit about what we do. And today's talk is a bit of another look at innovation ecosystems and startup ecosystems, building on what Nicholas introduced previously. And so I think this might be a really timely topic for Japan, for places like Sendai, and actually for a lot of places in Japan that are trying to become world-class startup ecosystems and places that attract really top startups and talent. And so how do you actually know what a startup ecosystem is, or what a successful one is? And I think you have to really look at what kind of frameworks are out there, and how are these ecosystems being assessed. And so one of the more credible frameworks is done by this group called the Global Entrepreneurship Development Institute. And what they do is they pretty much are assessing and ranking startup ecosystems around the world based on 14 different pillars of entrepreneurship, they call them. And I won't go through what all of the 14 are, but for example, things like the opportunity perception. So for example, for a startup ecosystem in a Japanese city, how is that ecosystem perceived in terms of what, if any, problems are there ready to be solved by startups and technology providers? So, you know, is there actually any value to be added by a startup going into that place? Another one would be startup skills. So ecosystems tend to be restricted by their geographies, at least the old school ecosystems. And so when we're talking about skills within an ecosystem, you know, are there people in the population of that ecosystem that can actually capably work on this new kind of, I guess, future of work, or innovation related work, or working with startups? Is there actually the human resources there to be able to get these projects off the ground? Another big one, and maybe particularly important for Japan-based startup ecosystems, is risk acceptance. So are there individuals in that startup ecosystem that are willing to take the risks necessary to start a new venture? Or are there corporations willing to take the risk, ready to partner with a startup or partner with a foreign startup? So these are the kind of pillars that this group are using to measure, exactly how mature is a startup ecosystem. And looking at the map here, you could probably like see maybe a little bit predictably, number one is, the home of Silicon Valley and a bunch of other great ecosystems, the US. But maybe a little bit less expectedly, Japan sits back at rank 28, and then on top of that, a much smaller economy like Australia is sitting up at number 5. So why is that? Why isn't Japan, which is the third largest economy in the world, able to have the third, best startup ecosystem? And so another sort of way to have a look at, how do you optimize an ecosystem is by looking at some of the work done by the Startup Genome Survey. So this is kind of a visualization of the data that came back from this massive survey done by this group, Startup Genome. And they got feedback from over 1 million companies across 150 different ecosystems in the world. And basically, what came back was these elements in these boxes here were the key to how successful the ecosystem works. And so if I was to kind of map this against a case study, so I'm in Osaka now, so I might think, how does Osaka fare, or which players fit into these kind of boxes? And so if you look at resources, there's a group that was mentioned on Nicholas's previous slides called Osaka Innovation Hub. And they're a quasi sort of governmental organization. And what they do is a lot of ecosystem building through events, regular events, but they also have a team dedicated to connecting founders and VCs and other players, and also international visitors as they come into the ecosystem on a sort of needs basis. So that kind of bit's covered in Osaka. So what is meant by, if we go to the right there, the green box, networks? What in this context, I think what they mean is business communities. So example in Osaka is we have something called the Osaka Keizai Doyukai, or the Kankei Ren, and they are sort of different versions of business chambers and consortiums where leaders from those businesses get together and talk about problems like, how are we going to be more startup friendly, and what can we collaborate on to do that kind of thing. And then if we sort of look down at the pink boxes there, so resource attraction. Many of you here might be familiar with the national sort of government entity JETRO, and the work that they do attracting not just startups but investment and in other kinds of organizations into Japan. And there's a whole bunch of equivalent functions within different levels of government here in Japan. So in Osaka, there's the Osaka prefectural government, there's the Osaka city government, and that kind of thing. And then startup experience. So, I think they're talking about the number of people that have actually gone through the cycle of starting up a company, growing it, and exiting, and then coming back. And that kind of profile of people are kind of crucial to mentoring the next generation that are coming through the ranks and out of universities and what have you. That if you go below that, you're talking about talent, talent to work in startups, talent to work in supporting organizations, even talent that understand innovation, but they work with corporates. That's kind of crucial. And so I think that's where universities and other sort of education organizations play a critical role. So I'll move on from this and get to some of the insights that we actually came across directly, because we're wondering what in 2020 do real startup global tech founders think about doing business in Japan here, and how do they see the startup ecosystem here in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And so we actually surveyed a group of companies that we've been supporting, who are all they're all bar one from outside of Japan, and they've all got global businesses, and they've all done businesses in countries other than Japan. And so they gave their kind of top ranked strength and weaknesses according to their firsthand experience here. And if you have a look at the left side, some of the weaknesses that were pointed out, a few of them are very kind of typical Japanese business features and popular sort of challenges, like the sales cycle is very long compared to some other countries, or the nature of the business culture itself can be quite complex. So it's difficult to know how decisions are being made with your counterpart in the large Japanese corporation, or even why things are going slower, or what their answers actually mean when during discussions. And then as you move to the center, there are a few interesting observations made by these startup founders around, things that play out well, or play out, to make life difficult depending on which side of them you are. So customer loyalty, it sounds like a great thing if you think about it as a startup that has landed a contract with a Japanese corporation, and you think, yeah, in some ways it's more likely that that contract will be renewed than in other markets. But in the same vein, to try and break the contract of a competing domestic organization is more difficult then, because they have an existing relationship there. And then if we jump across to the right-hand side, there are some very unique strengths that Japan has, that the startup founders have noticed. And most importantly, the size of the market. So, as a startup, you probably want to have a very large market, and you probably want that market to be cash rich. And there were a couple of the key positive factors that the startups mentioned. So moving on from there, knowing these kind of general strengths and weaknesses, what opportunities are there to improve the ecosystems in Japan, or how should we be building and designing the startup ecosystems that we're working in? And I've got just 3 points I wanted to bring up. One is building collaboration. And I think a good example of this is off the back of a recent initiative from the national government via METI. There are a number of geographies in Japan that have been selected as key startup cities of Japan. And what's happening there is consortiums of academia, universities, and large corporations are coming together and basically trying to co-design and co-develop initiatives that make those ecosystems stronger. Training innovation skills. So a lot of universities and private organizations now are getting into entrepreneurship training, and the whole sort of design thinking and learning by doing and lean startup frameworks are being introduced pretty broadly now. And then I and then the last one I'll mention here is corporate venture building. So basically, I think there's a challenge for a lot of companies to really find the right kind of startups to work with, where you have an underdeveloped ecosystem. And so there is an opportunity for Japan to leverage its strengths, which I think one of them is really the corporate Japan and the cash in those companies, and work with those companies to actually create new ventures from zero. And that's something that we're also doing as Rainmaking, something called venture building. So essentially, as universities spin out companies, having corporations do the same. But I feel like I'm running over time now. So I'm going to maybe wrap up here. And yeah, just thank you very much for your time.